The sun had barely begun to rise when rancher Ethan Granger noticed what looked like a lifeless form floating in the icy waters of Silver Pine Lake. His breath caught in his throat. A young Mustang, still as stone, bobbed silently near the shoreline, its tiny body looking more like a ghost than a living creature. Ethan's boots crunched across the frost-covered grass as he approached, dread curling in his gut. A harsh winter had hit Montana's highlands early this year, already claiming several wild horses from the surrounding herds. But this was a foal. A baby. It didn't stand a chance. He stepped into the frigid water without hesitation, jeans soaking through instantly, and muttered softly, "Poor little soul." His plan was simple: retrieve the body, give it a respectful burial. It was the least he could do. But as Ethan's calloused fingers reached the foal's soaking fur, something stopped him cold. A flutter. A faint pulse. His heart skipped a beat. He leaned in, squinting against the rising mist. The foal's chest. Was it moving? Barely, but yes. There was life. Ethan froze, caught between awe and urgency. What he had assumed was a tragic recovery was suddenly a desperate rescue. The foal, no more than 3 months old, had somehow survived the freezing waters through what felt like pure will. This little one still fighting, Ethan whispered, more to himself than to the creature in his arms. Clutching the tiny, half-frozen Mustang against his chest, Ethan Granger surged out of the water and raced toward the ranch house. The foal was frighteningly still in his arms, its soaked body limp, its breathing faint, but that fragile heartbeat gave him hope. A miracle, yes, but a fragile one. The bitter cold sliced through Ethan's soaked clothes, but he didn't care. His boots pounded across the frozen earth, eyes locked on the warm glow of the kitchen window up ahead. Inside, Lena, his wife and a former veterinary nurse, turned from the stove just as he burst through the door. Her gasp echoed through the room when she saw the bundle in his arms. "Get the table cleared, now," she said, her voice sharp with urgency. Ethan gently laid the foal on a pile of blankets Lena had thrown onto the old wooden table. She was already checking vitals with practiced hands, her calm expression masking the storm of worry beneath. "How long was it in the water?" she asked. "I don't know," Ethan replied, breathless. "Could have been all night. I thought it was gone." "It's hypothermic," Lena said, wrapping the foal in dry towels. "Pulse is weak, but there. We need to raise the temperature slowly or we risk shutting everything down." As Ethan built a roaring fire in the stone hearth, Lena dried the foal's coat with gentle, rhythmic motions, murmuring soothing words. The foal didn't respond. Its eyes stayed shut. Its body gave no sign it knew it had been rescued. They hadn't given it a name yet, didn't dare, but both of them were already hoping. "We'll call Dr. Reyes," Lena said. "She'll want to be here. And we'll need the emergency formula if it wakes." Ethan nodded, his eyes never leaving the motionless form on their kitchen table. The fire crackled, filling the room with warmth and light, but the fear in his chest burned hotter. "I'm not letting this one go," he whispered. That night, they stayed beside the foal, working in shifts to gently massage its limbs, monitor breathing, and whisper words of encouragement, fighting for a life that nature had already marked for death. And then, just before dawn, a flicker of breath turned into a sigh. The foal twitched. Its tiny nostrils flared. Its eyelids fluttered. Hope surged through the room like sunlight breaking through a storm. By mid-morning, the old ranch road crackled under the tires of a dusty veterinary truck. Dr. Elena Reyes, a seasoned large animal vet with over 2 decades of experience, stepped out, her boots crunching on the frozen gravel of Granger Hollow Ranch. Inside the warm kitchen, the little Mustang lay bundled in layers of towels, its breathing still shallow but rhythmic. Lena was perched beside it, gently rubbing its legs to stimulate blood flow. Ethan stood at the window, watching for signs of life with the intensity of a soldier guarding a fallen comrade. Dr. Reyes walked in, and her expression shifted from skepticism to awe the moment she laid eyes on the foal. "It's still alive?" she asked, almost disbelieving. "Barely," Lena replied, "but it's hanging on." Dr. Reyes approached, stethoscope already in hand. Her fingers worked methodically over the foal's chest, checking vitals, reflexes, temperature. "This kind of hypothermia should have been fatal," she muttered, "especially for one this young." She examined the foal's eyes, ears, joints, taking notes on a worn notepad. "Its heartbeat is improving. There's still some muscle response. Whatever happened out there, this little one wasn't ready to quit." Ethan sat down heavily beside the fireplace, relief washing over him. Then it's got a shot? Dr. Reyes didn't answer right away. Her gaze lingered on the foal's face. We'll see. The next 48 hours are critical. If it wakes, if it feeds, there's hope. That word, hope, hung in the room like a fragile ornament. Lena, who had quietly been preparing a warm bottle of goat's milk replacer, returned to the table. We can't wait for a miracle. We need to give it a name. Ethan looked at the tiny creature swaddled in front of them. Its coat, though still damp, shone with patches of white streaked with chestnut, like fire breaking through smoke. Ash fire, he said quietly, because it came back from the ashes. Dr. Reyes nodded slowly. Fitting. Hours passed in quiet care. They warmed Ash fire slowly, rotating towels, keeping him near the fireplace. As the sun set beyond the frosted mountains, a quiet gasp drew everyone's attention. The foal moved, lifting its head just barely, and opened its eyes. Two deep, intelligent brown eyes blinked slowly, meeting Ethan's with what felt like recognition. Ethan, Lena said breathlessly. He's awake. Ethan dropped to his knees beside the table, brushing his hand softly along Ashfire's neck. Hey, little one, you made it. Ashfire's legs twitched, weak but purposeful. We try the bottle now, Dr. Reyes said, already preparing another batch of warm milk. Lena moved carefully, lowering the bottle toward the foal's mouth. Ashfire turned his head. No, Ethan whispered, dread curling. He doesn't know what it is. For agonizing minutes, Ashfire refused. Confused. Scared. Weak. Then, slowly, the foal reached out, lips brushing the nipple. And then, he drank. Just a few mouthfuls at first. Then more. Then with growing hunger and strength. Yes! Lena cried, tears welling in her eyes. Dr. Reyes smiled for the first time that day. You've got yourselves a miracle. Ashfire drank like his life depended on it, because it did. But none of them knew then that survival was only the first step. What came next would test them all in ways they never imagined. 3 weeks had passed since that frozen morning at Silverpine Lake. Ashfire, once a breath away from death, now roamed the small paddock behind the Granger Ranch house, his legs stronger, his steps more confident. The foal had beaten every odds stacked against him. His coat had filled in with a glossy, chestnut-white sheen, and his eyes now sparkled with curiosity and quiet intelligence. Every morning, Ethan Granger would find Ashfire waiting by the fence, ears perked, tail flicking, eager for his now customary greeting. He'd nuzzle into Ethan's chest like a dog, a gesture that had become their unspoken bond. But with every ounce of strength Ashfire gained, something else returned too, something primal, ancient, and untamed. You're not a pasture pet, Ethan whispered one morning, scratching behind the foal's ear. You're wild, aren't you? Ashfire's response was a playful rear and a gallop across the paddock, graceful, fast, and gloriously free. Lena watched from the porch, a mug of tea in her hand and worry in her eyes. He's remembering what he is, she said quietly. He's not built for fences, Ethan. They both knew it. That truth was driven home one night when Ethan tried leading Ashfire into the barn during a sudden cold snap. The young Mustang balked, eyes wide with fear. He reared, yanked the lead rope free, and bolted back toward the open field, his body tense, his instincts screaming. Lena stepped into the barn doorway, wrapping her coat tighter. We can't treat him like a domesticated colt. He was born wild. Every cell in his body remembers it. Ethan sighed, rubbing his hands together for warmth. I just wanted to keep him safe. A few days later, Dr. Reyes returned for a routine checkup. She brought with her both good news and a storm cloud. His vitals are excellent. Growth rate's impressive. He's stronger than most Mustangs his age, she said as she examined Ashfire, who now stood tall and lean with power beneath his soft exterior. But there's something else, she added, her tone darkening. I've been contacted by the Wildlife Land Authority. They're organizing a roundup next month. Any wild horse found on or near federal land without documentation will be seized. Ethan's jaw tightened. You're saying they'd take Ashfire? They'll classify him as an undocumented wild foal. He'd be moved to a holding facility, she explained grimly. And you know what happens in those places. Many don't survive, especially the young ones. That night, Ethan stood in the pasture with Ashfire by his side. The wind bit through his jacket, but he didn't move. Ash fire grazed peacefully, occasionally glancing up at his human like a child would a parent. You trust me, Ethan whispered. But the world out there won't. Ash fire nuzzled into his side. The bond was unbreakable, but Ethan was beginning to understand something painful. To truly protect Ash fire, he might have to let him go. The next morning brought a visitor to Granger Hollow Ranch. Marisol Vega, a 52-year-old wild Mustang trainer and preservation advocate, stepped out of her dusty pickup, her long braids streaked with gray and her boots well worn from years in the high country. She heard about Ash fire from Dr. Reyes, and when she saw the young Mustang trot across the pasture with all the elegance and fire of his kind, she paused at the fence and whispered, "He's got the spirit." Ethan joined her, arms crossed, face weathered not from age but from the burden of knowing what was coming. "He nearly died," Ethan said, voice low. "Now I'm supposed to prepare him for something just as dangerous?" Marisol didn't look away from Ash fire. "Keeping him isn't protection. It's a cage. You think you're saving him, but he was never meant to be tamed. If they find him here, they'll take that choice from both of you." Her words hit with precision. Ash fire, sensing something unspoken in the air, trotted toward them and stood just behind the fence, his eyes locking onto Ethan's. Trust, bond, confusion. Ethan exhaled slowly. "How do I make him wild again, when all I've taught him is how to love us?" Marisol turned to face him, eyes gentle but firm. With patience, with purpose, and with pain, she began teaching Ethan a method called rewilding, training the Mustang to fear humans again, to stay alert, to avoid capture. It was the opposite of everything he'd done since pulling Ash fire from that frozen lake, and it broke his heart. Ethan started with small things, unpredictable noises, distance, discouraging touch. Ash fire grew wary, confused. He would approach with the same affection as always, only to be met with cold detachment. The young Mustang's eyes, once wide with warmth, began to darken with instinct. "It's working," Marisol observed. "He's remembering who he is." But there was no joy in her voice. 1 week later, Dr. Reyes returned with grim news. "The roundup's been moved up. They'll start combing the land next week. If he's not gone by then." She didn't need to finish. That evening, Ethan stood beside Ash fire in the dark. The young horse no longer nuzzled his chest. He stood a few feet away, cautious but calm, his breath misting into the starry night air. "I can't protect you anymore," Ethan said softly. "Not here." Ash fire's ears flicked, his body still, as if he was listening, understanding. Tomorrow, they would open the pasture gate and let him go. The sun hadn't yet crested over the mountain ridge when Ethan Granger stood at the pasture gate, one gloved hand resting on the latch. The frost on the ground shimmered faintly under the first light of dawn, and all was still, painfully still. Behind him, Lena stood near the porch, arms wrapped around herself, her face streaked with silent tears. Dr. Reyes stood nearby, binoculars in hand, documenting what would become a case study in both veterinary medicine and wild horse rehabilitation. And Marisol Vega, calm and silent as the mountains themselves, waited with quiet reverence. Ash fire stood alone in the center of the pasture, no longer a frail foal, now a lean, powerful young Mustang with strong legs and a storm in his eyes. He no longer approached Ethan, but he watched. Ethan's voice broke the silence, low and steady, barely above a whisper. "This is your chance, boy. Run free. Be what you were born to be." He opened the gate slowly. It creaked like the hinge of a chapter closing. Ash fire noticed immediately. His ears twitched. His head lifted. He took a tentative step toward the open space. No sound came from the watchers behind the fence, only breath, held tight in their chests. The young Mustang moved forward, nose in the air, sending the cold wind that carried hints of sagebrush and pine, of the wild country beyond the ranch. Then he paused, just for a second, and looked back at Ethan. The connection between them, formed in the grip of near death and strengthened by care, sacrifice, and trust, flared once more. Gratitude. Goodbye. And then he ran. Ash fire galloped through the open gate, hooves striking the frozen earth with thunderous rhythm. Each stride took him farther from safety, and closer to freedom. He didn't hesitate. He didn't stop. He knew where he belonged. Ethan watched until the speck on the horizon was no longer visible. Marisol lowered her gaze. Dr. Reyes turned away to hide her tears. Lena walked over, gently sliding her hand into Ethan's. "He knew," she whispered. He understood. Ethan nodded but didn't speak. His eyes were on the ridgeline where the young Mustang had vanished. And somewhere beyond it, his heart ran too. 3 days later, the Wildlife Land Authority began their roundup. Trucks, corrals, and distant echoes of helicopters swept across the valleys and ridgelines of the Montana backcountry. Horses were driven into temporary pens, their hooves pounding in panic. Dust rose into the crisp air, mingling with the cries of wild Mustangs separated from family and freedom. But ash fire was not among them. No sign, no trail, no trace. He was gone, into the deeper parts of the wild where fences could not reach. Back at Granger Hollow Ranch, life moved on, but not unchanged. Ethan walked the pasture alone now. He no longer carried bottles or led warm blankets out into the early morning frost. But he still found himself pausing at the gate, listening, hoping for the impossible beat of familiar hoofs. Lena caught him doing it more than once. She never interrupted. Sometimes, late in the day, Ethan would hike to the ridge above Silverpine Lake, the place where it had all begun. He'd stand quietly, watching the wind ripple across the water. And in that stillness, he could almost hear it, a distant gallop, a snort carried on the breeze, the wild heartbeat of something once fragile, now free. Dr. Reyes checked in occasionally, but her tone had changed. "I share Ashfire's story everywhere I go," she told Ethan during one visit. "He's proof of what's possible when you choose sacrifice over ownership, when you let love mean freedom." Marisol returned just once, months later. She brought binoculars and a quiet look in her eyes. They stood side by side on the ridge and scanned the distant meadows. Then she pointed. "See that?" A small herd grazed in the distance, 4 mares, 1 stallion, and a younger Mustang standing off to the side, watching over them like a silent sentinel. Ashfire, taller, stronger, untouched by rope or hand, but unmistakable. Ethan's throat tightened. "I told you he'd survive," Marisol whispered. "What you gave him wasn't just care. It was courage. The kind that lets the wild run again." They watched until the herd moved beyond the trees and vanished once more into the wilderness. That night, Ethan returned to the lake one last time. The stars were clear, the wind gentle. He knelt by the frozen shoreline, where months ago, he'd found a foal that the world had already given up on. And he whispered, "Thank you for finding me too, Ashfire." If Ashfire's story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Leave a comment below. Would you have had the strength to let him go? Hit the bell icon for more true stories of hope, heartbreak, and healing between animals and the people who love them.